Hello everyone, this is the Chapter 14 walkthrough of my notes. Remember, you can find my notes under the Week 3 questions thread under the post My Notes, so you can have the Word document that accompanies this. Okay, Chapter 14, more on evolution. Woohoo! This is a lot about speciation, which has a lot to do with your Week 3 DQ1. So what is macroevolution? Macroevolution is the major changes in the history of life, which are usually evident in the fossil record. We talk about life, I mean all life, everybody. So like the changes to having mammals, the changes to having birds instead of dinosaurs, the changes of an appearance of a new species, all these really big changes, and they're usually evident in the fossil record because they're so large, they're happening in lots of places, or a big change, and there's so many critters that somebody's going to get fossilized. The formation of a new species is called speciation. This occurs when one species evolves into two or more species. So last chapter we talked about how genetic drift could lead into kind of two, like the homozygotes both being preferred, or changes across altitude or something. So anything that causes this might eventually lead into speciation. It could just be that some random mutation is favored. It happens enough and that splits off. So, what is the biological species concept? This is species as a group of populations whose members have the potential to interbreed with one another in nature to produce fertile offspring. This is offspring that can reproduce. So if you take two creatures of the same species, no matter where they're found, if it's the male and the female version or whatever they're doing, you stick them in a cage together, they could potentially have kids that could reproduce as well. Okay? So let's go through our little definition section that I always seem to throw in here, just to make sure that you understand those really big words. So speciation is the process by which one species splits into two or more. Microevolution is changes over time in allele frequencies in a population. Macroevolution is the broad pattern of evolution over long time periods, spans, whatever. Species is a group of populations who breed together but don't outbreed, so they only breed with each other. Reproductive isolation. So now, how does a species become a species? So reproductive isolation, these are barriers that keep two species from reproducing. So maybe their genitals won't match up, that kind of thing. Hybrid is an offspring of different species. So think like mules, that's horses and donkeys together, they get mules. Tigers and lions, right? Don't they get like tigons or something? Things like that. So they're going to have a child, but that child typically cannot reproduce again. So mules are sterile. Prezygotic barriers. So these are barriers that block before fertilization, right? So plants can't breed with flies. We have different genitalia, so we can't get together, that kind of thing. Postzygotic barriers. These are barriers that block after fertilization. So the fetus can't develop. The egg and the sperm can't meet each other, or after fertilization, so you would have fertilization. So the fetus can't develop. The children are sterile, that kind of thing. Now let's talk about allopatric speciation. This is geographic separation, right? I think separation is an A. So this is where the two critters, one population gets split. Let's say there's a mountain range in the center. They start to develop differently due to genetic drift, and ultimately this would lead to different species. Sympatric speciation. This speciation occurs in populations that live in the same geographic area. So just randomly, maybe there's a time change, so one's available at night, one's available at day. For some reason, they can no longer interbreed. Maybe you got the homozygotes getting preferred until there's just a complete speciation event. Polyploidy, these are extra sets of chromosomes. Autoploidy, extra chromosomes from a single species. Allopolyploid is a extra chromosomes on two species getting freaky and are fertile. Okay. Hybrid zones is an area where the two species get freaky. So this is where the two species, like there's species 1, species 2, and then there's an in-between area where they're interbreeding. Punctuated equilibrium, or equilibria, this is There's not much going on, so there's stasis, which would be I believe. There's stasis, and then there's rapid and sudden change. So punctuated equilibrium was like, we're all kind of in our Hardy Weinberg, not much going on, just hanging out, no really big changes. Then suddenly everything's set up, and there's a huge change. Think of kind of like now with iPhones and apps. So for a long time we had our cell phones, they were evolving, but there's not really a big change. And suddenly you had the world of apps evolving, and a lot of things have changed. So that's that sudden change, like suddenly it's a whole new thing. Let's go past the checkpoint. Blah, blah, blah. There's all sorts of behavioral, mechanical, gametic isolation, lots of isolations. So behavior is like, how does your behavior prevent mating? Maybe you have to do certain things. Mechanical, stuff doesn't get together, and then maybe the gametes don't get along. A bunch of checkpoints. I was loving on checkpoints. And so I said, think of technology as an example for how a lot of these might happen. Okay, so geologic time scale, reflecting a consistent sequence of geologic periods. The Precambrian, a general term for about 540 million years ago, followed by the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, the Cenozoic eras. Each of these divisions represents a distinct age in the history of Earth and its life. So we're talking about geologic time scales. You kind of put them into these eras, and they're really long, right? So we're not talking about like a year. We're talking about millions of years. So you'll see at MYA all the time, millions of years ago. Radiometric dating. So this is based on the decay of radioactive isotopes. We talked about this a little bit in the first week. And the dates in the geologic time scale were established by radiometric dating. There's a good little thing on the bristlecone pine that has to do with a little bit more of the current stuff. Let's scroll down. Plate movements, shifts, land masses that animals inhabit. So this is the reason we care about this in biology, right, is think about the marsupials in Australia. So the marsupials used to be everywhere. Our plates move all the continents around. The marsupials in Australia are isolated from everybody else, and they hang out. Mammals did not evolve there, but the marsupials everywhere else got taken over by mammals with the placenta. The fossil record reveals that 5 mass extinctions have occurred in the last 500 million years. So that's just telling you, like, things die off and things get replaced. Linnaeus' system assigns each species a 2-part Latinized name or binomial. The first part is the genus. Let's capitalize it, because always when you see it in writing, you should see genus capitalized and italicized, to which the species belongs. It places the similar genre in the same family, puts the families in orders into classes, and classes into phyla, phyla into kingdoms, and kingdoms into domains, right? Below genus is species, and then we work up our way to domains. I think there's a pretty picture down here. I kind of like to think of it the other way. So I'm going to scroll to the bottom and then work my way up. So so everybody, there's just a few domains, right? Then if we look at, because we want to get ultimately to our leopard, right? Our panther. Leopard, panther. Scroll too far. So if we're looking toward that, so first we would look in the domain Euchera. Then we would go into the kingdom Animalia. From there we would go into the phylum Chordata. So we said it's a eukaryote, it's an animal, it's got a backbone, it's a mammal, is in our class, Mammalia. From Mammalia we go to the order Carnivora, it means it's a carnivore, to the family Felidae, it means it's a feline, and then to the genus Panthera, it means it's like a panther relative. And then the specific species, so there should be only one species, and that's Panthera pardus. Sometimes there's subspecies, but in this class we'll just go down to species. So Panthera pardus is our specific leopard that we were looking for. So you can see how the naming system gives a little bit of the evolutionary history as we know it of the animal. So as things with genetics change, the names of some of these may change. Sometimes families change, orders change, just depending on where that animal fits in genetically as well as anatomically. Because we are always looking for where the fossils and the genetics cross. Where do they meet, and what does that tell us about this animal? How can we relate that in the naming system so it makes sense for everyone? Okay, let's scroll down, scrolling, checkpoint. Okay, so phylogenetic trees. This is one of those terms that my husband has learned and has no idea what it means. Phylogenetic trees depict hypotheses about the evolutionary history of a species. These branching diagrams reflect the hierarchical classification of groups nested within the more inclusive groups. So it's basically looking at what we just did, but it would be for specific species, and it would try to do kind of the evolutionary tree and say what came when, who broke off when, what makes the most sense. You know, Occam's razor, least changes, least things you have to do, probably the most correct. I'm going to pause here for 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Did you miss me? Just need some water. So species from different evolutionary branches may have certain structures that are superficially similar if natural selection has shaped analogous adaptations. So they're not actually related, but they evolved because of the same area that they're living in. This is called convergent evolution. Similarity due to convergence is called an analogy, not a homology. Homology, right? For example, the wings on insects and those of birds are analogous flight equipment. They evolved independently and are built from entirely different structures, but those critters inhabit the same niche. And so due to this, it makes sense that they would evolve similar structures, right? And there's a nice article on it. I think we may actually get through one chapter in one video. Phylogeny, so that's the evolution history of a species or group of species. Systematics is a classification of organisms and determining their evolutionary relationship. Taxonomy is how critters are named and sorted. So that's what we'll be caring about more. Phylogenetic tree is a branching diagram depicting evolutionary history. An analogy, remember convergent evolution is happening. Homoplasy is an independent analog. Molecular systematics, so this is like the systematics of classification, but now we're using DNA. Cladistics is common ancestry in primary criterion. So you talk about clades. Clades are a group of species. So you're a splitter or a lumper. Do you put your clades together, or do you want more species? Shared ancestral character. This is a characteristic that originated in the ancestor. So everybody after it's got this characteristic. Shared derived character is an evolutionary novelty unique to a clade. So one group got wings, and now everybody in that clade have a wing. An outgroup is a species that evolved before the species that we're studying. So we'll see, like, if we're looking at primates, then maybe amphibians would be the outgroup because it evolved before us. In-group is the species that we're studying. Maximum parsimony is the simplest answer. I think Occam's razor. So you have to do a lot of hoops to jump through, or it just makes sense. Maximum likelihood is the most likely evolutionary path, because without a very detailed fossil record, which is very unlikely, we're just going to have to figure out what is the most likely. That is where statistics come in. Phylogenetic bracketing, using parsimony to predict shared features. And so here is an example of a phylogeny. You see where everything evolved and then who is in a clade together. Okay? So it's saying, it's showing you the evolution, ultimately, of hair and preorbital fenestra. Right? Then there's a checkpoint. Cladistics is a scientific search for clades, which is from the Greek word branch. A clade consists of ancestral species and all its descendants, a distinct branch of a tree of life. There's a really good Tree of Life website you should check out. I think I have that in my links post. And this is identifying clades involves identifying homologies unique to a species or to a higher taxonomic cluster, such as a class or phylum. Makes sense? We're gonna make it done. Let's see if I can talk in 30 seconds. So this approach clarifies the evolutionary relationship. So that's what we're trying to do, is basically take this really complicated version of evolution and simplify it down to a diagram that makes sense, that we can see. That's the point of pictures, diagrams, and charts, to make things logical. I hope this helped.